guys, it's Andy, personal trainer from the Writing Gym, and I'm so excited to share this episode with you. In this episode, Annalisa talks with best-selling author John David Mann about his newest book with co-author Bob Berg, The Gogiver Influencer. Speaking about influence, how much have you affected others lately? You know, a book can help you to massively scale your business, but where do you start? How do you write it? How do you target your ideal client, speak their language, and begin that important conversation that leads to you being hired? Laurel Elite Books is a full-service hybrid publisher that takes you from idea to sold. To see if you are the right fit for what they offer, apply for your Laurel Elite Business Scaling Consultation at laurelelite.com. They're Laurel Elite because they're cut above the rest.
Well, John, I am so excited to have you on the Writing Gym podcast again. You are a frequent flyer, and I'm so honored for you spending time with us, spending time with our listeners, and talking about your writing process and the amazing books that you're coming out with. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I love being here. There are a few things I love talking about more than the writing process, because not very many people ask about that, and it's what I study and do every day. So yeah, great to be here.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your most recent Gogiver book.
So this is called The Gogiver Influencer, and it is the latest, which means it's number 3 in, let's see if I can do this right, in a series. Ta-da! Which we are in talks with our publisher. We think that this holiday season, we're going to put this out as a 3-book set, as a boxed set, which I really hope we do, because I think it would be so much fun to have, you know, it's like the 3 Godfather movies or the 3 Star Wars original trilogy, or pick your trilogy. I may be getting grandiose there a little bit, but anyway, so this latest story is the 3rd parable in the Gogiver series, and it's called The Influencer. It's really, though, more about how to handle conflicts and resolve disputes, how to build a relationship in a situation where there's any kind of something that doesn't work, you know? So in a sense, it's more about how to work collaboratively and how to have meaningful civil dialogue. I say those words because in such a careful way, because it may be that there are people watching this now who haven't noticed this, but lately there seems to have been a lack of civil discourse in our national psyche. It's funny because The Influencer is basically about Bob Berg's favorite topic. Bob is my co-author and my writing partner. And Bob and I co-create all the Gogiver books. And he talks about sales, and he talks about, you know, leadership, and he talks about business and entrepreneurship and all kinds of things. But his most cherished topic is how to have civil dialogue, civil discourse when there's disagreement, and how to resolve conflicts constructively, productively, collaboratively, and how to influence and persuade others without coercion and manipulation and all of the combative baggage that comes with the anti-collaborative way of dealing with that. So he actually approached me a few years ago and said he has a book out called Adversaries into Allies, which is about turning enemies into friends, basically. And he said, do you think there's a way we could take the basic ideas in that book, which are near and dear to me too, but they're really what he cares most about. So I think there's a way to take those ideas and weave a parable around it. And I said, I'll get back to you on that. So I said, let me think about that. I spent a day looking over my notes and his book and thinking, and I came back and said, oh yeah, I think there's definitely a way to do this. So let's do it. So we got a contract with a publisher. We said, okay, parable number 3 is going to be about this topic. We almost called it the Gogiver Negotiator. In fact, we did for a while. It was its starting title, the Gogiver Negotiator. but we didn't want to give the impression that it was like a narrowly focused book about business negotiation. So we changed it to influencer, and we're really glad that we did, because it's not, this could be a negotiating handbook. And I know people are using it and will use it as a negotiating handbook, but it's really about much more than that. And it's really about, all the things I just spoke about. So I didn't say anything so far about what's in the book, but that's the context of the book. That's the purpose of the book. And it's just been out for, as we speak, less than a month. It just came out.
Yes. Yeah. And, I was sharing with you before we started recording here, John, that in my opinion, this is the best of the three. I love all three, but I really, really loved the Gogiver Influencer. I feel like the story is really compelling and the message is so meaningful. And as you point out, so timely. It could be timely anytime. It's always nice to know how to get along well with others, but I think that you're right. We do have some points of contention in modern society.
It's amazing how many people who we give the book to say, "Oh, I want to send a copy to everybody in Congress." But and what I always say back is, that's a very nice idea. I endorse that plan. Please go ahead and do it. But it's not 435 is it 435? Yeah, it's not 400 or 500 people or ad Senate in. It's not a couple hundred people who are dictating the entire national conversation. Representatives really do represent us. And so what's really going on in this country is, 100 million people talking to each other and seeming to have forgotten how to do that in a civil way. Personally, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're still adjusting to the capacity that social media gives us. Suddenly, a lot of people who never had a microphone have a microphone. A lot of people who never had any ability or vehicle for speaking in public can talk to a million people or 1,000 or however many. And it's almost like, oh my God, suddenly everybody has access to everybody. And so we're all kind of blurting out what's our stream of consciousness. And we're having to relearn how to talk to each other. And it's kind of ugly sometimes, but it's necessary. And so I think, that's what we're experiencing, I think, as a people.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go back to that idea of getting along. When we had Bob Berg on the podcast way back when your previous book came out, he talked a lot about partnership and how he had found you and how you guys originally came up with the concept and working together. And now you've come out with many books together, and so there must be times during that time where John has one idea and Bob has another idea, but the two of you have worked it out over the course of these 4 books that you've written together. Did I get that right? There are 4 in total. So what is that like to work with a co-author? What kinds of things come up and how do you work those things out?
Oh God, it's awful. We both have physical bruises of the fights that we've had. And it gets ugly. It just so happens. It's funny because, I've at this point I've made a career I've written over two dozen books, and all but one of them have been partnerships with somebody else. So I've kind of made a career out of partnering with somebody else who's got strong ideas. In some cases, if they're memoirs, it might be somebody else and we're writing their life story. And so I'm writing my take on their story and actually trying to be them in the way that an actor plays a role, like, whatever. So in the case of a book like The Gogiver, it's really my ideas and his ideas. I mean, it's kind of the Gogiver leader was kind of driven by ideas that I've articulated over the years about leadership, but also Bob had. We both have our life experiences and our ideas and our things we've taught in the past that we have to blend into a story. So yeah, it's interesting. And it's been just easy as could be. I mean, we rarely disagree. But let me get oblique and go off to a second, and just say that, there's 5 principles in the book. We call them the 5 secrets of ultimate influence, I think. There's always 5 principles in every Gogiver book. It's just, it's the geometry, it's the philosophical geometry of the Gogiver universe. So there's 5 principles, and the 5th one is always seemingly contradictory to the first 4. Or the fifth one always has sort of an element of paradox about it. That's just the way it works. So in this case, there's 4 principles of how to have civil discourse, and the 5th one is to let go of being right. You have to let go of being or be willing to let go of being right. Or how do we say? We say let go of having to be right. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you that for me, I've discovered that has become one of the principal, like maybe 2 or 3 skills as a writer that I've had to use to succeed or to move, to be productive in my field. When I finish a manuscript and I give it to qualified people to read and critique, whether they're amateur readers, people who are, or they're professional editors, or whoever, I get back critique. And every time I get it back, like I just turned in a manuscript for my latest book with Brendan Webb, my Navy SEAL friend. We have a book coming out in August called Mastering Fear. It's a little book about how to master fear. And it's like most of my books with Brendan. A lot of his experience is in it, but I'm the guy that sits down and writes the book. So I'm making a lot of this up from my own life experience as I go along. And then there's a lot of his stuff in there. I finished the book, I finished the manuscript, I turned it to my editor. And of course, when I turn it in, I turn in a manuscript that has like no typos, no misspellings, no grammatic errors. It's as close to perfect as I can make it. It's the way I work. I'm like Ravel as a composer was. His manuscripts were like that. And I think it's just perfect. I think it's great. I think it's like, like the next Shakespeare or something. I don't know. I think it's really good. It's as good as I've been able to make it. So I have a very high opinion of it because I've fallen in love with it, because that's what you do when you work on something. It's like your kid. I give it to them, and a month later it comes back, and she came back with this one and said, there was so much wrong with it. She said, I think this whole chapter maybe needs to go. I think these chapters have the wrong title. I think all of these epilogues you put in, I'm not sure they work. I mean, she was very, very nice about it. But she had not just minor changes, but draconian changes to make in the book. Every time I get critique back, my first response is always, no, you're wrong. And I don't say it, and I don't type it, but inside I am thinking, nope. I mean, I'll look at this. I'll keep an open mind, like this.
Yeah, arms crossed, yeah.
This is my open mind. Keep an open mind. I hear everything you say, but by the way, no, you're wrong. And what we'll find out after we dialogue through this, and I try it out, is that we'll find that you're maybe like 5% right, but mostly you're wrong. And the book is perfect the way it is. And maybe there should be a few minor changes, but that's it. And I've been doing this for over 10 years, but that's still what I come up with. I think I'm right. Well, of course I do. We all think we're right. If we didn't think that we're right, if we didn't think our position was right, then we wouldn't be having that position. Mm-hmm. So I have to be able to sit down and say, what if there's something going on here that I don't know? What if there's something going on here that I'm not seeing, and she, in this case it's a she, is seeing something that I not only don't know, but I'm not even seeing. And so then I go through the process of taking on what she's saying as if it's a jacket, like I'm going to wear it and see what it feels like. And I go through and I try stuff out and I find out. And at the end of it took a couple of months to revise that book. And at the end of that process, it was a much better book. And it wouldn't have been if it weren't for her. Mm-hmm. And that's what Bob and I are getting at in the Gogiver Influencer. We're getting at having a dialogue with somebody, having a negotiation or an exchange or a conversation or an interaction having an experience with somebody else where you're not only polite and pleasant and civil, but you also really open up your mind to say, I think that what I'm after is right, but what if there's something bigger than that I'm not seeing? Mm. And what we find is, in the story, there are two people in the story. And I want to say more about that because this was a big challenge for me in writing the book. And from a writer's point of view, this will be fun to talk about. The big challenge in this book was having not one protagonist, but two. Mm-hmm. Not one mentor, but two. Mm-hmm. And having two protagonists that don't see each other's point of view at all. And then how do we get the reader to identify with them? That was like a kind of interesting process. In fact, so for those of you who haven't read the book yet, the book opens from the point of view of this guy named Jackson. He's going into a meeting, and the person he meets with is not very pleasant. And he gets an impression of her, which is like he's totally intimidated. She is tough. She is cold. She is overbearing. She totally runs over him in the meeting, and he walks out of the meeting being totally crushed. At least that's my interpretation. And so probably at the end of that first chapter, I don't want to give too much stuff away, but probably the end of that first chapter, if you put the book down, you're going to go, wow, I really relate to Jackson. I get who this guy is. He's a terrific guy. You love his business model. What he's doing has to do with cats and dogs and making their lives wonderful. And this lady is a piece of work. The second chapter opens up. Suddenly you're in her head. And now you're seeing the world from her point of view. And we did that on purpose because that's what the book really calls us to do, is to step out of our perspective and into the other person's perspective, not just in a token way, but in a genuine way, to actually try to put that person's life experience on and say, well, what's going on with that person? Let's say you get off a plane, you take a cab to the airport, you're going to a convention, and maybe you're a speaker there. And so you get to the desk and you're speaking that night and it's 5:00 and you've been delayed in traffic and you check in and you say, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm here to get my room key. And they go, let me check. I'm sorry, we don't have a record of that reservation.
Oh boy.
So you've got a beautifully set stage for, I don't want to curse on your podcast, but what the my heavens are you talking about? This reservation was made 6 weeks ago. It was made by my host. Do you realize I'm the speaker? I'm speaking in an hour and a half. I've got to change. I got to shower. I got to eat. I'm not ready for the thing. This is a disaster in the making. So are we actually asking you at that moment to step across the desk and stand in that person's shoes? Yeah. I mean, you could say, what is your problem? Are you crazy? Everything I just said, let me see the manager. What you're doing is you're making your problem her problem or his problem. What if instead you stop and take a breath and say, you guys must be going crazy. It's 5:00. It's Friday. There's obviously been a foul up in my reservation. You guys must be going nuts. It must be insane here right now. And just start with that. In the book, we call that setting the frame. We've just reset the frame. Instead of me pillaring you and blasting you for something that's not, your fault. It is a problem for me, but instead of being your adversary, I've stepped across the desk next to you and said, let's partner on this. I get what your situation must be like. I mean, it's a small example, but that's, one of the sort of the core ideas in the book. So that was the writing challenge, is to write a story from two people's point of view, which, murder mysteries and so forth do all the time. But to do that as a parable and still keep it a simple story, it's easy to read, not too complicated, not too literary, and it's short. That was, I think, the biggest challenge of the book, is to write two people instead of one, and two mentors instead of one, 2 points of view instead of one, and make it all work.
Yeah, well, and it's beautifully done. And so for those of you listening, if you haven't picked it up yet, please do pick up the Gogiver Influencer. And I just want to take a moment to say, John, that I've been very blessed to have the opportunity to get to know you better over the years and to get to know Bob better over the years and to spend time with both of you. And, I just want to commend you on being who you are and living in the authenticity of that. Everything that I read in this book is everything that I've seen in the way that you and Bob have treated me, have treated my team, that you're really living this message. This isn't just a book that you put out there because you thought, oh, that would be a good idea, or this might sell a whole lot of copies. There's a real authenticity to who both of you are and the message that you're writing about. And that comes through, I mean, maybe for me, because I know you guys a little bit better, but I think that, reading this book, anybody who reads this book can get to know who John and Bob are really well, because you live in this truth every single day. And I just really appreciate that about you guys. So can you talk a little bit about what that is to really to write a message that's near and dear to your heart? Because I think that a lot of writers have a message that they want to share with the world, a message that will help others, a way that people could look at life or live life in a different way that might enlighten them or lift the burden a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience is to write from that place of authenticity? Yes.
Sure. And first of all, thank you. And I want to add to that, I've heard Bob talk about this business and relate a time that he remembers vividly. And I don't know how many years ago this was. It was before I knew him, they say 20 years ago, when he got to a point where he found himself a very angry person, and he was reacting angrily a lot in situations. He kind of talked himself through this process. It's hard to picture that now. Yes.
So I'm just going to back up because it totally cut out there. And I'm also going to shut down whatever's binging and beeping over here. So can we just back it up, take two, to this story about Bob 20 years ago?
Yes. I just quit, by the way, my web browser, which was still open,
yes,
and my email, which was still open.
Yes.
So.
All right. I'm doing the same thing. So, all right.
I totally will. So I will say, first of all, thank you for those kind comments, and I want to add to this that before answering your question, I've heard Bob talk about this business of civil discourse and turning enemies into friends and so forth, and he talks about how 20 years ago or 25 years ago, before I knew him, he talks about sitting down with himself and realizing that he's become a very angry person. And he's seeing himself react really in an angry and combative way in a lot of situations. This is almost impossible for you or me to believe, knowing Bob, but it's true. I mean, I believe him that it's true. And I want to say that those kind things that you said about me, I remember times in my life, chapters in my life when I was a much younger person, when I didn't feel that way at all in terms of being authentic or and I remember the discomfort of struggling to try to put on the appearance of being an expert and trying to put on the sense of being an authority about this or that and just trying to be and give this impression and give that impression and at the time I don't think I would have been able to point to it and articulate it and be separate enough from it to identify it, but I am now. I can look back and say, oh God, that was just murder. My point is that the things you're describing about being authentic and being genuinely non-combative, but open to other person's points of view, and being able to have a open mind and civil dialogue, civil discourse, without giving up your own point of view, because that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about being a doormat or just being a yes man or any of that. Of being genuinely yourself, living in your own skin, standing in your own shoes, and at the same time, being able to just be totally present with the other person and open to that. that is something that anybody can learn to do. Anybody can become. And I say that because I know that, like I said, that Bob and I, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, were ridiculously miserable people in various ways. So yeah, this is not magic, and this is not genetics. This stuff works. The stuff in the Gogiver influencer, the Gogiver leader, and the original Gogiver, this is not Pollyanna. This stuff really works. And we know that not only from our experience, but now from 10 years of thousands and thousands and thousands of people writing to us and talking to us and telling us. It's been such an incredible journey. You know, we've sold over 1 million books of these parables. And so anyway, to your question, what's the experience like of writing from that point of view? Let me say first that all the books I write, Gogiver, or whether the books of Brandon, my Navy SEAL friend, or other people's memoirs like John Addison, the business leader, or Rita Davenport, the sales president, or Bob Beckel, the former alcoholic, drug addict, politician. I mean, all these books, when I sit down to write them, in order to write a persuasive and fulfilling book, and to be able to do that, I have got to fall in love with the person, the experience, the life, whatever it is, the point of view that I'm writing about. I've got to be able to do that. And it's kind of like when I hear film actors talk about stepping into roles and playing people who aren't Gandhi, you know, or Mother Teresa, or even, you know, Katharine Graham, the Washington Post, or when they are inhabiting more unsavory characters or difficult characters. Even then, like Charlize Theron playing whoever it is, Wernan, the monster, the serial killer. Mm-hmm. She talks about finding the place in that woman that she could identify with. It's an extreme example, and I don't have examples that are that extreme, but I have turned down book projects that I just didn't feel I could relate to. I couldn't step into, where I don't think that I could have tapped that place of authenticity and done a good job writing the book. So when I'm writing a memoir of a Navy SEAL sniper or a Marine sniper, or what, even though I've never been a sniper, I've never shot, rifles in a military context, I don't have experience like that at all. I can still relate to that person's values, that person's character and personality, and what they hold as important. So that's the first thing. The first thing, I've got to connect. I've got to find in the story what I connect with. When I wrote the book with Charles Carroll, Chef Charles Carroll, The Recipe, story about the boy and the chef, I had to totally connect with those characters. And that's, for me, just like critical step number one. But then the next thing I want to say is, okay, once I know what we're writing about and I have a sense of that, for me, I've got to tell the story. I tell the story of those characters. I kind of have to forget about good negotiation or civil discourse or principles of generosity of spirit or any of that crap. It's all not crap, but all of that principle, right, and all of the things that we want to teach, I have to forget it all, because once I have a sense of who the characters are and what the situation is, I sit down and just start to try to act it out. And I have to act it out as true to those characters as I can possibly be. And I'll write dialogue, I'll write a scene, and go back to it a day later, a week later, or even a month later, and say, this is off. This does not. And I've had, in The Influencer, the book that we're talking about now, there's a character called the coach. There are two mentors. There's a short, athletic guy called the coach, and there's a tall, big-boned, dramatic, elegant woman who's the judge. I made them as opposite as I could possibly do. And they're both mentors in the book. When we first turned the manuscript into the publisher, I gave a copy to a few of my friends. One of them is a writer buddy of mine, And he sent it back, and he made a few comments here and there, a few technical things. He said, the coach, he said, something is off about him. It's like, it's not believable. He seems like almost facile or something. And I read it to my wife, and she was like, yeah, I kind of like, he felt phony or something. And I read it, and I was like, oh my God, they're right. He was no good. And I was so grateful to them, because it didn't take much, but the dialogue was wrong. The character, he wasn't quite real. It wasn't a real person. It was me being clever and writerly. It was like a little bit of, oh, what a clever writer am I crap on the page. So I had to strip away some things that I thought were cool. They weren't cool. They were dumb. They were clever but stupid. And then, just like that, like magic. I mean, the next day I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, so there you are, and there he was. And then it worked. And interestingly, that didn't happen with the judge at all. The judge just like flowed from my fingers. It was easy. You get that. Some things are easy. Some things are hard. Some things don't work. But I want to just, again, stress that, particularly for anybody who wants to write parables, or if you're writing a nonfiction book that's trying to teach some principles, even there's still story in those. If I try to write from the point of view of what I want the reader to learn, or what I want to teach, forget it. DOA, dead on arrival. It's like suddenly I'm writing a lecture. Right. I'm not even a good one. So I have to try to write the story. Like, what happens to these characters? I have to act it out on paper. That's what you have to do. And often I don't know exactly who these characters are when it starts. So it's a process. When I say acting it out, it's also a process of kind of exploring and finding out who they are, playing with them and sort of discovering who they are as you act them out, which I imagine actors do in improv all the time.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think if I'm understanding what you're saying here, John, it's really about taking that idea as maybe the platform or the stage, but that the real actors on the stage are the storytellers. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, is that they're multi-levels here, and
right.
Really working through that. And it sounds like you're pantsing, if I can use one of my favorite terms, the storytelling.
Interesting term.
To really explore, how do those characters not only live out the themes that you're trying to deliver, but also the actual story itself. If just one more addendum, a parable is a really hard thing to write. And I think that we talked about this when we talked about the recipe on that episode. Parables are hard because it is hard not to be too preachy or, lecture-y, if you want.
Exactly.
When it comes
That's why people hate parables.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, you really have the ticket here, the golden ticket, to how to get out of that trap, which is focus on the story, focus on the narrative, focus on all of those craft principles that have to do with story. And let's come back to the ideas later. We can always infuse those more if we need to, but we don't want to be too key.
Exactly. I mean, you think about a book like The Alchemist. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a parable, but it's a really novelty parable, and it's it's in the Gogiver books. We have a thing where we actually have 5 identified numbered principles. So there, it actually is, there's the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is in the story. And then we always figure out some way that one of the characters is writing something down in the book or, whatever. So there's, that makes it easier for the reader in a way, but it makes it harder for us because it's so easy for that kind of thing to be artificial, to feel artificial. In the recipe, it was easy because Chef Charles actually has a little card that looks like this. I mean, here's the card that I made up. And and he has a card like that people can, you can download this from the recipe website. And then here it is, here's the life principles on the other side. He has a card like this that every employee carries in their pocket that has his 20 principles of the kitchen. So, you know, I mean, you got to use that as a plot device, but the moment you get too didactic and too teachy, you said preachy, which is absolutely right, even too teachy, then suddenly what you do is you take the reader out of the story. It's like having actors stare at the camera suddenly and start talking, and it's terrible. And it's interesting, you know, in the book On Writing, Stephen King talks about theme, and he's not the only one. Every teacher of writing talks about theme at some point. And one of the things that he says that I love is that he often doesn't. He says he doesn't look for theme in his first draft. It's not until the second draft. He may even say to the second or third, I don't remember, but it's first you write the draft, and then you go back and look at what you've written and start noticing what you've written and start noticing. He says that's where we'll actually start to notice certain themes emerging and then start to tinker and find ways to emphasize it more and take out things that don't fit and so forth. It's almost like you do that here, where you know what you're going to write a book about. You're going to write a book about how to be tidy, or write a book about how to be forgiving, or you're going to write a book about how to build a legacy, or whatever your topic is going to be. You're going to write a book about blah, 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 and you know that. And you make up a storyline or a situation that you're going to use to exemplify that and illustrate it. Okay, fine. Then you figure out who your characters are, and you start to see the story unfold. You have to make yourself forget about the principles, and then it's almost like you discover them in the process. And as you do, they may not be exactly what you planned. Now, if what you're trying to teach is congruent with who you are, then you're going to discover what you wanted to teach because it's who you are, and you know you're not going to end up with a crisis, but you may end up with things changing and taking a different shape than you thought, or it being a little, you know, the number 5 isn't magic. I mean, I think it is magic, but it wasn't given to us when we wrote the first Gogiver. We just it happened in the process of writing. Mm-hmm. So you have to give yourself permission to discover and change as you go, and discover the theme as, you know, in what you've already written.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us, what was the most fun part about writing this book, John?
Oh, you know, I tell you, for me, there's sort of three stages in writing a book. There's all the preparation, which is depends on what kind of book it is. It may vary. If I'm writing a memoir, it's, you know, hours and hours of conversation with the person, and then maybe research in the background of their profession. In the case of a Gogiver book, I'm often reading a bunch of Bob's stuff, whether it was another book of his or blog posts or, you know, whatever, and usually a bunch of my own stuff, things of my own blog posts or you know, manuals of things. So I'm reading a bunch of stuff we've both taught and chewing over it. And then part of the preparation is, as I'm saying, kind of brainstorming an overall situation. Like in this case, there's a business. Jackson Hill has a business, which is called, what's it called again? I just forgot. Oh, it's called Angels Clothed in Fur.
Yes.
It's a business of, it wasn't called that originally. That was one of the hardest things to find. It's a pet food business. He built it in his own kitchen, feeding his own dog. So his dog Solomon, who's a key character in the story. So, you know, we figured out the basic setup of the situation. That's all preparation. And you kind of get an idea of some of the things that might happen. And I might have, in this case, 12, 14, 18, 20, Gesundheit pages of notes. Then comes the actual writing part, which is sitting down and like acting it out. And that doesn't take me very long. For a Gogiver book, that might be 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks or less. And there it goes. And then comes the fixing it and finishing it part. You ask what's my favorite part? That in the middle part, it's the hardest part. But oh God, I love it. Because it's the part where you feel like the magic happens and you don't know how it happens. And you sit down every morning. I sit down every morning with a blank pad, and it's a really, especially with the Gogiver books, with with parables. I've written a few other parables now. I have 2 other parables I just finished with other co-authors. And it was the same process, very similar process. It's just such a great experience of the actual giving birth to the thing. And the preparation is critical, and that's often very methodical and systematic, and it can take weeks or months or even a year. And I like that part a lot, but the actual writing part is so cool. And then the finishing and fixing it up part, that's just like pure joy, because that's like the finish work, the painting after you built the thing. I will say that right now I'm at the very beginning process of writing a novel. It's a thriller, a murder thriller, and I've never done anything remotely like this before. It's a full length, serial killer thriller. Totally unlike anything I've done before. And I can't wait to talk with you about it when it's done, because I have no idea what this process is going to look like. But I suspect it's going to be the exact same process, just on a bigger and, in a sense, looser scale. We'll see.
Yeah. So here's a potentially controversial question. So you endorsed storytelling for pantsers. So here's an opportunity to publicly thank you for that endorsement.
You are very welcome.
And thank you for reading it. I appreciate that. And there are different schools of thought on how to prepare for writing a book. And, clearly I do a lot of work with pantsers. There are writing coaches or instructors out there who say, the only way to write a book is to outline. Where do you stand on the pantser versus plotter thing? Do you think there's a better way to be a writer, or do you agree with my statement that you should find the writer you are and be that writer? What's your opinion on this pantser plotter topic?
I'm going to answer that in reverse order. The second thing you asked, should you find out the writer you are? You have to find out the writer you are. And one of the most interesting parts of this process for me has been kind of the ongoing study of how I work best. And on a recent podcast with entrepreneurs, I said the same thing is true for entrepreneurs. The same thing is true probably in any profession, but particularly in those professions where there's a lot of latitude in how you work. You need to find out how you work best. Like, for example, most writers that I've ever heard talk about their process have a certain time of day or a certain kind of almost schedule that seems to work best for them. They are not the same. It's taken me a long time, actually, to figure out how I work. And the difference that it's made for me, I have become so much more productive in the last two years or so. And the biggest difference, or one big difference, is that I used to spend a lot of effort trying to go what I now see was contrary to how I work best. I can, when I sit down and write in the morning, I can go for maybe 90 minutes, and I will usually fill one page, maybe two, rarely, usually one page of a regular letter-sized pad with scribbles of all kinds. That's what I can do. And I reach a point, it could be 60 minutes in, 90 minutes in, maybe 2 hours in, where it's like the well is dry or something. And in the past, I would get to a point like that and try to push and go and say, my God, the day's just starting, and keep going. Nah, you've got to find the rhythms that work for you. So I have in my notes for something that I was writing, two different writers talking about their process. One is A.J. Jacobs. He says, I'm a big fan of outlining. I write an outline, then a slightly more detailed outline, then another with even more detail. sentences form, punctuation is added, and eventually it all turns into a book. So here's a guy who starts with an outline, and he refines and refines and refines and refines the outline. I've written books that way. Then next is Khaled Hosseini, who wrote The Kite Runner and many other books. He says, I don't outline at all. I don't find it useful, and I don't like the way it boxes me in. I like the element of surprise and spontaneity, of letting the story find its own way. And so he says he finds writing a first draft is very difficult and laborious and also disappointing. These are opposite approaches. He starts out by writing a draft. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it, the process. He doesn't like the way it looks when it's done, but he writes the whole draft with no outline at all. And then he starts from the whole thing and starts making it better and better and better and moving in like that. Jacob starts with an outline that he's carefully crafted, and he elaborates on it, and then it's a book. Mm-hmm. And they're both amazing authors. So what I have to say about that is I think it's really important to understand the two different functions that you have. And you can call it right brain and left brain, and that's probably an oversimplification, but it works. One is the faculty that you have to be organized and to organize and to think methodically and systematically. And that's the faculty that edits and judges. The other is the faculty that you have to make leaps of imagination and to make dramatic swaths of color happen and to just generate that you don't even know how you do it. Call that right brain. I need to use them both to write. It's taken me a while to figure out how to tap those two sides of myself in a way that's where they work together and they're productive. They're not fighting each other, and I actually get stuff done. Mm-hmm. So I love outlines, but I find the limit of my outline really quickly. I'll write an outline and it might get to be 2 pages or 3 pages, and already I'm starting to feel like, it's too long. I try to get there'll be a point where I've got an outline kind of going, and I try to get it down to a single page. I like to try to fit a whole story into a page. And as soon as I've done that, it's like I have to kind of forget it and put it away and then sit down and start. So I probably haven't organized my thoughts well enough to describe in detail how I balance those two, but I think you have to learn by observing yourself how you balance those two sides of yourself, because I think we all have both of them. We have the pantser side that is just like, let's just throw ourselves in the water and just try it. Well, you have to do that at some point. When A.J. Jacobs takes his nice methodical outline, how does he expand on it? He doesn't say, well, I think another word here would be good. No, he gets an idea and goes, oh, what if we went, it may only be 2 sentences, but he's pantsing. It's like, it's right braining.
Yeah.
No matter how spontaneous you are and how Hosseini you are, you have to get at a point where you say, well, now, wait a second, does that fit? You have to reach a point where you are tapping into the method of the system of your brain, where you're saying, okay, that was great, but I think it fits over here better, and this part doesn't work, and what's supposed to happen next here? You have to have that. How do they work together? I can tell you how it works for me. I have 2, and I think I've told you this before. I have 2 different chairs. I have 2 different places where I work. Where I'm sitting right now at my desk, and I have my computer, and I have my stuff around me, and this is my left brain station. And over there, I think you may be able to see where is it? My chair. I don't know. I can't find my way around my own office. Anyway, I have a chair off in the corner of my office, which is a cozy armchair. I sit there with no computer, no books, no pens, no nothing, but a blank pad and a pen. I'll sit in that chair for an hour or 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'll just go right brain. I'll just completely make stuff up. And as I said before, sometimes I can't go longer than an hour, and I'm exhausted. And then I come back, I take everything I've done, I come to my desk, and for the rest of the day, I'm Johnny Methodical. I'm editing stuff. I'm taking what I wrote over there and I'm playing with it. I'm editing what I did yesterday. I'm answering correspondence. I'm handling the galleys in some other book, whatever. I am not being creative. I'm being industrious. And tomorrow, I can't wait until tomorrow morning. I go back in the creative place, but I'm done for now. And I don't try to get back in that chair because for me, it just doesn't work. My time is 7 to 10, maybe in the morning. And, it's kind of how it works.
Yeah, and I love how you've articulated that, because as you know, John, all of the work that I do with writers is based on how your brain works. And I think that that's a really good articulation of the application of neuroscience to that particular process. It's not just about finding the writer that you are and being that writer. It's really about, and by the way, how do our brains work and how can we optimize what they're meant to do for us, and how that works, which, as you know, I wrote some silly stories about in Storytelling for Pantsers to really illustrate how our brain can take over if we're doing the wrong thing in the wrong moment, and it's not helpful.
And I cannot exaggerate how often the voice comes up in my head that says, this is just hopeless. I don't know what I'm doing. This is impossible. It happened to me yesterday. I sat down with this novel I'm working on, and I was like, I'm lost. This is hopeless. And I'm just starting. I fortunately have, I have a stack of books I can look at, and I wrote all those books, and they all worked out okay. So I have enough evidence, but you know what? No matter how much evidence I have, I'll sit in the chair, and I'll sit down with the paper, and the first thing I'll start thinking is, oh my God, this is like, this one, I don't think this is going to work. And I really mean it. It isn't just a reflex. I mean, I really mean it. A couple of days ago, I spent probably 90 minutes pacing in my office, talking to myself out loud, because I had this thing going where I was overwhelmed by the hopelessness of the task. For me, there's a lot of faith involved. And the leap of faith that the finished book is out there in the ether, this is kind of the way I visualize it, that the actual story's done somewhere. It's there. You could say it differently. You could simply say faith that I will find a solution. But that's usually the way I try to frame it. This is a puzzle, and I know there's a solution, and I know it's available to me. And not only that, I will find it. I know I will find it, or it will find me. But I have to go find that place of faith all over again, almost every day. And that for me is the struggle of writing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, John. That's really helpful for our listeners. And as you know by now, since you're old hat at this, the last question we ask is, what major tip do you have? What main tip do you have for writers who would like to publish their own book?
Who would like to publish their own book? And by that, do you mean self-publish?
No, just write their own book and get published.
Write a book and get published, right. And so I'm going to maybe answer that in two different ways. Because I get a lot of correspondence from people who have a book they want to write, who haven't before written the book. And so the first answer that I want to give is if you're not an author, established author, if you haven't written before, you haven't published before, let's say, and you want to write a book, you've got a book you want to see published. My first suggestion is get really clear on what your dream objective here is, and your real dream objective, not your dream objective like I want to be the next Harry Potter. I mean, that's okay, but if that's your real dream objective, but what is it what's the outcome you're really looking for? Are you looking, people will always say, who's your market? Who's your readership? Well, that's a good question. But a broader question is, what's your goal here? Do you want, what will make you sit back and say, that worked? For me, I've written books that have sold 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 copies. That's nice, and they're good books, and they've made a difference in people's lives, and that's satisfying, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Personally, I am only really satisfied if I write a book and, more than 100,000 copies sold. I want to touch millions of people's lives. That's my personal goal. But I'm not saying that's the right goal. I know people who want to write a book because they want their grandchildren to know what happened in their life. That's a phenomenal goal. And if that's your goal, you may be satisfied with a readership of 8 people. It depends on who the 8 people are, right? So you may want to get your story just right for certain important people in your life for your legacy. And it may not be 8 people. It may be you want to have a book that will change this industry. That may be 1,000 people or 100. There's so many levels of goal. And, there's authors who reach far huger markets than I have ever reached. So it isn't like I'm at the pinnacle of that, far from it. So that's number one. When people ask me, should I self-publish or should I go up for publisher or whatever? Well, first of all, what are you trying to do? What's your goal? What is it that will make you sit back and say, it worked? And then the second thing I'll say is, if once you know what you want to write a book, you know what it is, you know what you want to do, and you know what the avenue is and the vehicle is. Start and do it every day. This is very cliche in a way, but I think you have to reach a point where every day, from today on, every day, and ideally at around the same time every day. There may be individuals that this doesn't go for, but so far, every writer I've heard talk about it says this. About the same time every day, you're going to work on it every day. Work on it may be research, work on it may be drafting, work on it may be editing, work on it may be pacing around in your room and talking out loud to yourself. And only 2 words go on the page. But it's at least an hour, and it's every day at about the same time. You can allow yourself a margin of error of like a day a week that you don't get to do that because you go to church or because you took a plane flight or because you had to do whatever it is, fine. But if you give yourself 2 days a week where you didn't do it, you're dangerously close to not writing a book.
Yep.
If you give yourself 3 days a week, you're not doing it. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's just that simple. If you give yourself 3 days a week when you're not doing it, then you're preparing to write a book, but you're not writing a book. So it's got to be every day. And 5 days, 6 days, 7 days a week, you are doing it. That's the basic thing of it.
I'm right with you. I think I've told you this story before, that for a very long time I had a Post-it note on my desk that said, writers write. That's what they do.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all it is.
Yeah.
John,
yeah. And you can't let yourself, I just want to add, you can't let yourself get in a bind, where you're stuck. If you're in a bind, here's the solution. Do something different. I don't care what it is, but don't stop. You can't stop.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John, so much for your 3rd appearance on the Writing Gym podcast. We really appreciate you. You're a valued guest. We appreciate your time. So thank you.
You are so welcome. I love doing this, and I so appreciate it because, as I said at the start, there are not very many places where I get to go and we really get to go into the process of it. And I love that you have your devoted legions of clients and friends and fans and who obviously adore you. That's really easy to see, and it's easy to see why. So thank you. I appreciate it. And I look forward to our next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Writing Gym podcast. Think of how much faster you could be growing your business with the help of Laurel Elite Books. Don't miss an opportunity to massively scale your business with the help of experts. Go to laurelelite.com today to schedule your free consultation. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you can be the first to receive tips on how to massively scale your business. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Writing Gym podcast. Happy writing!